Hello and welcome back to Kidocracy at Large. I'm Siddhan Chandra, here every Saturday to present current events in the light of Kidocracy, a global tendency that declares the rule of minors and minorities. That is, Kidocracy educates adults and the majority through movements led by minors and minorities. Like Fridays for Future, Me Too, Idle No More, and BLM. Black Lives Matter was building quietly over several years, since mid-2013, when a white adult murderer of a black child was acquitted of this crime in Florida. Since then, Black Lives Matter was building quietly, building the muscle of solidarity, so that when George Floyd was murdered by a white supremacist cop, it re-erupted in a powerful way and had an impact at the very top. It is molecular connections with and between racial minorities that is impacting the molar institution of the state. Under the pressure of the pandemic, the Eid erupted and spoke back to the superego. And guess what? This time the superego listened and aligned itself closer to the racialized and impoverished bodies suffering from white supremacy and a raging pandemic. We need to wrap ourselves in this best case scenario that actually happened in the last year in order to be able to look at what is literally the cremation grounds of India's present under Modi's fascist rule. Over the last 20 years, Modi weaponized Hinduism into a majoritarian cult and transformed India into a police state. With flamboyant impunity and unfettered arrogance, he addressed huge rallies, flying in the face of science, bragging about the size of the crowds in the middle of the second wave of the pandemic. Culture took precedence over nature when the Kumbh Mela, a Hindu festival of colossal proportions, was allowed to be held over 30 days, despite the government and the priests knowing the risks. When the press reported senior government officials raising concerns about it becoming a super spreader event, the Ministry of Health declared it fake news. And Mahant Narayan Giri, an influential priest, said, "Death is inevitable, but we must maintain our traditions." Celebrated every 12 years, this year it was held a year too soon. According to The Wire, it was because the astrologers deemed the timing right. In the middle of a pandemic, these are our patriarchal leaders. BLM, escalated by the pandemic, toppled Trump. Now it is time for Modi. What will India's BLM look like? Friends, mourning is necessary, and the grief and suffering of survivors has only begun. And it is personal. I have lost people I have known since childhood. I have family and friends living in tall buildings with numerous cases of COVID. But let us promise ourselves to make this extreme suffering of the survivors and the preventable deaths count for something. Let this genocide ignite an anti-fascist movement led by minorities, to teach the majoritarian Hindu right to unlearn fascism. Let us make them respect minorities, women, children, the poor, Dalits, Muslims, stateless refugees, farmers, and at the bottom of their pyramid scheme, nature itself, all worked to death. The Trump presidency was demolished by COVID and BLM. And what's more, the new leadership has proved itself teachable. Derek Chauvin, the murderer of George Floyd, has been convicted. Climate action has been prioritized. Even AOC has praised Biden for exceeding expectations. We are at a profound turning point in human history. Let us not squander this moment to end fascism globally. Just as COVID cannot be considered a local or a national problem anymore, same with fascism. For democracy to survive anywhere, it has to be upheld everywhere. The hashtag Modi must resign is trending on social media. Even if those platforms are being censored, the writing is on the wall. The writing is on the body bags. It is on the impromptu cremation grounds. It is written on the desperate pleas for oxygen cylinders. It is written on the bank statements of the newly impoverished class who spent everything they didn't have on private health care. Arundhati Roy, sketching the last 20 years of Modi's rise and rise, calls for an end to his rule in The Guardian. The crisis-generating machine that we call our government is incapable of leading us out of this disaster, not least because one man makes all the decisions in this government, and that man is dangerous and not very bright. This virus is an international problem. To deal with it, decision-making, at least on the control and administration of the pandemic, will need to pass into the hands of some sort of non-partisan body consisting of members of the ruling party, members of the opposition, and health and public policy experts. India's way out of fascism might very well begin in this way. Sky is the limit on how India's minorities, Dalits, Muslims, farmers, women, environmentalists, labor unions can transform India. Sky is the limit on how the minorities can seize the reins of political agency, like BLM did in the US. Roy mentions that India spends a paltry 1.25% of its GDP on healthcare. And even that is inflated. It is more like 0.34%. She cites a Lancet study according to which 78% of urban healthcare and 71% of rural healthcare in India is handled by the private sector. Anti-fascist education that could integrate the 99% could well begin with the universal demand to increase healthcare funding. And while we are at it, demand a sturdy social net. There is enough taxable wealth in India to support a welfare state. In Canada, where healthcare is free, life should be better. But in the province of Ontario, where I live, COVID is rampant. Premier Doug Ford, a conservative, continues to fly in the face of science, refusing to pay sick leave for frontline essential workers, not containing the pandemic, while treating racialized, impoverished bodies as COVID fodder. And the most affected by the pandemic and the most impoverished region of the Greater Toronto Area, namely the Peel region, is grossly underfunded by $1 billion, says Baldev Mutta, founder of Punjabi Community Health Services, a not-for-profit agency serving since 1990. Speaking yesterday at a webinar organized by the Committee of Progressive Pakistani Canadians, Mr. Mutta called on the South Asian community to resist the urge to leap into charity mode. Instead, to take a principled activist stand and demand proper healthcare funding for the region that is home to the most racialized and impoverished communities of Canada. And more urgently, to demand paid sick leave for all essential services frontline workers. Let us stop aspiring to be the model minority that engages in charity. Charity is the fig leaf of capitalism, fig leaf of neoliberalism. Let us throw our energies into revolutionary activism, proactive community building, to integrate all the minorities, the 99%. Let us learn from BLM. That is the only way we can derail fascism, powered by neoliberal capitalism, at home and globally. Next week, I hope to speak of the opening night film of Hot Docs Film Festival, Artificial Immortality. I want to address how the 1%, represented among others by Deepak Chopra, seeks to immortalize itself while the 99% chokes to death. I'll tell you this: between the digital and the original Deepak, it's hard to tell which one is more creepy. Till next week. Bye.